Good evening. So, did you have a look at the questions on science and positivism? No. You have to be equally vigilant and constantly participant. You should not be passive. So, in fact, the topics that we have covered so far and the last part of that which I am going to cover today, last in the sense presently, there is one bit out of it which I have told you I will cover later, different theoretical strands of research in sociology that I am not covering right now, but excluding that, other areas we are covering. So from that you will get at least 2 to 3 questions in the exam. It's the same. Positivism is scientific method only. Yeah, it has been mentioned separately because they have mentioned positivism also. So, as I explained to you yesterday, that positivism is nothing but an extension of the methods of physical and natural sciences to the study of society. Now, if you have any doubts or questions from yesterday's lecture, you can tell me. Otherwise, I shall proceed forward with the next topic. Which attack? Ha. All right. That I said positivism has been criticized at 2 levels. One, that sociology has not succeeded in being really positive. Positivism is not possible because there are so many failures on the part of sociologists as far as they try to apply the positivist approach. This is the first level. Now, here I would like to add a point also, that the positivists have tried to defend themselves, saying that these failures are inherent in the subject matter. They are not a methodological failure. It is not our failure as a positivist. It is because of the inherent limitation that human beings are the subject matter, the most complex of all. So, this is a limitation inherent in subject matter, and they point out, as I mentioned this point yesterday also, that they point out that even physics encounters similar problems. That in microphysics, that certitude, certainty, which is to be found in macrophysics, is not to be found in microphysics. I gave you the example of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. So, therefore, redundant. Positivism is still relevant for a macro level inquiry. You understand macro and micro? When you are studying Indian society as a whole, taking the whole society as a unit, that is macro level analysis. When you are observing a particular individual or a particular group, that is micro level. So, these problems arise only at the micro level analysis. To carry out a macro level analysis, even now we follow positivist approach. Because when you want to study India as a whole, what will you include in India? The patterns that exist. the patterned aspects, and then you talk about generalization, make generalization for Indian society as a whole. So there you do follow positivist approach. Even the critiques of positivism, they have themselves followed the positivist approach. That Max Weber, you remember yesterday I talked about neo-Kantians, and influenced by neo-Kantians, Max Weber was a close friend and colleague of the other neo-Kantians. So even Max Weber believed that to rely on methods of natural sciences alone in social research would be a serious mistake. But when Weber conducted a study of Protestantism, he applied the positivist approach only. Because at a macro level study, when you are studying, you understand Protestantism. Protestants are a sect of Christianity. So he made a study of Protestants. Some Christians are Protestants. So he conducted a study of Protestantism in Germany. So that was a macro level study. All Protestants were being studied at the same time. So in that he applied positivist approach only. So they say positivism remains relevant even now in a macro level analysis. One. Now I am coming to her question. What is the second level of attack? The second level of attack or criticism is that positivism is not even desirable. Mind you, almost all, though not everyone, but many of those who say this, that positivism is not even desirable. First one was positivism is not successfully workable. But the second point of criticism is positivism is not even desirable. Majority of them are micro level sociologists. The only macro level sociology which also attacks positivism is the case of feminists. Feminists also attack positivism. So I mentioned various critiques, the neo-Kantians, the phenomenologists, the critical theorists, then Elvin Goldner, and also postmodernists. To that you may also add feminists. So what is their point of criticism? These people question some of the basic assumptions of positivism. They question some of the basic assumptions of positivism. One, that social reality is like physical or natural reality, having an independent existence of its own. It's a reality out there. And since it has an independent existence, it doesn't depend on the observer. That's what positivists believe. So it can be observed from outside and is verifiable. This is one of the assumptions. This assumption is rejected by critiques or anti-positivists or non-positivists. I gave an example yesterday of phenomenologists. I'll discuss that point again today when I'm discussing today's topic, objectivity. The issue of objectivity also I discussed yesterday. So, the second assumption which they question is that reality can be known by observation. Social reality can be known by observation. They say no, that's not the case. Why? Because they say a very important part of human behavior are the subjective meanings which people carry in their mind and which guides their behavior. The subjective meanings. Meanings are hidden in the mind. They cannot be observed. They cannot be known by observation. They say, as I gave you the example of the phenomenologist Atkinson in the case of suicide rate, Durkheim believed suicide rates are objective facts existing all by themselves, independent of the observer. He said, no, suicide is a result of classification. The data on suicide is a result of classification carried out by the coroner. Coroner creates suicides. Which death is to be called suicide, which is not to be called suicide, is decided by the coroner. And he decides it on the basis of common sense thinking. So, common sense meanings are the basis on which social reality comes into existence. Social reality is not independent of the observer. Every aspect of reality, even physical reality, I call it a chair. This is actually a piece of metal and a piece of wood, which I have given a meaning as chair, and I say it is used for sitting. So, it acquires a meaning. I have created this meaning. If you carry a personal computer to a tribal living in Andaman Island forest, he would not give that meaning. He will say this is a monster. Somebody talking on the screen, it's a monster. He will break it with a stone. So, the personal computer has a different meaning for him than what it has for me. So, this is how reality is shaped by the meanings that we assign. And when this is true of physical objects, it is even more true of social relations. I gave you example of Nehru, Edwina, Mountbatten. That what was the meaning? What was their relationship? That depends on the subjective meanings which Nehru had in his mind or Edwina had in her mind. That's not observable. And thirdly, they say that meanings are changeable. What you consider good today, you may not consider it good tomorrow. As I mentioned the other day, giving an example, that people fall in love and they fall out of love also. Meanings change. So, human behavior is changeable. And therefore, at best, very limited generalization in a probabilistic form can be made. Law-like generalizations are not possible and not even desirable because they don't exist. So, this is the second level of criticism. Is your point clear? Anybody else who has a doubt? Any question?
That you have to use deductive logic on assumptions and existing theory. But
Existing knowledge.
And for scientific method, we use the term that they are inductive in nature.
Yes, there are both. Scientific method involves both the things. Deductive logic as well as inductive logic. as I mentioned the other day, when we move from a general statement to a particular statement, that's deduction. All right. We arrive at a hypothesis on the basis of deduction. Now, we repeatedly test the hypothesis. Hypothesis is a particular statement, specific statement. When the hypothesis is repeatedly tested and proved, then we jump to a generalization. So, when we move from particular to general, it is called induction. That is inductive logic. If you have that flow chart, the two parts of the flow chart, one indicates deductive logic, the other indicates inductive logic. Stability dimension, that things continue as they are, people continue to follow the rules. There is a continuity, every day you are present here at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, sorry. So that there is a continuity. Patterns of relations persist. If I give you the example, as I said, people fall in love. Some people continue to be in love all their lives. So there is continuity. There are happy marriages. I'll talk about it. We have not yet discussed. I'll discuss in detail when I take up research methodology that there are quantitative methods and qualitative methods. But since you asked the question, very simply and briefly, I'll answer it right now also, that when you observe and collect the data or the facts in numerical form, that's called quantitative. All right. There are various types of quantitative techniques, including statistical methods you use. On the other hand, when you collect information in linguistic form, language, conveying meanings and motives, that's qualitative. That's qualitative research.
Because the enlightenment thinkers are condemning the reality.
Yes.
So they are negative. So that's why we should need.
Yeah. Why were they negative? Because that condemnation led to destruction of the feudal order in the form of French Revolution, which created so much of chaos and violence in the society. Comte believe in order and progress. So we need change which is harmonious and smooth also, without violence and upheavals.
But here we are saying the positivism means objectivity and social reality. So what's the exact definition of positivism?
I didn't understand your question.
He coined the word positivism.
Positivism. That, why did he call it positive? He firstly called enlightenment philosophy as negative. That you have understood. Second thing, he says instead of that, now what were enlightenment thinkers doing? They were just speculating about an ideal society, how world should be, based on their own logical thinking and assumptions. So they were not combining reason and research. And in that, when they described the ideal world, the real world they condemned and wanted it to be destroyed. That led to conflict and chaos. On the other hand, Comte said we should start by accepting the world as it is, base our knowledge on the basis on existing facts. That's affirmation of the reality. That's being positive. And that knowledge will allow us to achieve progress with order and stability. If we follow that knowledge, we would be able to avoid all this chaos and disorganization that exists. Clear? Any other question? I am happy that today you are asking questions. You should ask more questions so that you have total clarity. Any other question? There is a subtle difference between anti-positivism and post-positivism. They are not the same thing. They resemble to the extent that post-positivists also to some extent criticize positivism. But they do not reject it out of hand totally. They say it is, for example, objectivity is one of the ideals of positivist approach. They say yes, objectivity is desirable, but they are realist enough that though it is desirable, it is not practicable. So, post-positivism is some kind of a middle path trying to reconcile, trying to have a compromise between positivism and anti-positivism, accommodating the valid ideas of both. Any other question? All right. So, today I am going to take up fact, value and objectivity. To some extent, I have already talked about this. Today, we will take it up in detail. See, what I have been discussing with you is sociology as a science, the topic 2 of your syllabus. Now, in that, we have discussed scientific method, science, scientific method, positivism, and the critique. Now, I am going to take up fact, value, and objectivity. There are 2 bits left out. Major theoretical strands of research methodology and non-positivist methodology. So, once I have discussed the different theoretical strand, what does it mean when we say theoretical strand? Theoretical means looking at anything in the form of a generalization, in a general way. All right. So, what are the general approaches to the study of society? I have already indicated them. That all, because he is talking about all the approaches, so it includes positivist approach. Then it includes non-positivist approach like neo-Kantians, and it includes critical research. I talked about critical theory, no? Those Frankfurt School. So, then it includes phenomenological approach and an application of phenomenology is another approach called ethno-methodological approach, and it also includes feminist approach. And you may add to that also postmodernists. Though postmodernism is not very popular, it is a very minority view because they go to the extreme. They say no truth can ever be discovered. Everything that you say is a point of view, and each point of view is as good as another point of view. So, no certain knowledge about society is possible. They take up a very extreme stand. But and accordingly, they follow a different type of research. So, these are the different theoretical strands. I'll take up each one of them in detail and then tell you how they what kind of research they conduct and then we will connect it with research methodology. Now, why I am delaying it is that your ability to understand these approaches would be better after you have listened to the thinkers. So, first I will cover the thinkers, then I will come back to this. Now, fact, value and objectivity. See, for this, for your reading on this besides the class lecture, you have to supplement your reading from the study material that is given to you by the institute. Page 60, 61, 62, 63 and 64 and 65 and 66 and half of 67. So that means from page 60 to 67, this book only. Fact, value and objectivity. So, first let us define what are facts. Although I have already talked about it, that those aspects of the reality that are definite, self-evident and have an independent existence, they have an independent existence. And since they have an independent existence, they are observable and verifiable. So they are called facts, or more specifically, they are called objective facts. They are called facts, or more specifically, objective facts. Because there are another kind of facts also, which are called subjective facts. They also are important. They also govern human behavior, but they are not verifiable. They don't have an independent existence. They are shaped by the observer. As I mentioned the other day also, the statement, the often used statement that beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. It is the observer who decides what is beautiful and what is not. So that's not an objective fact. Now, positivists believe that social reality also consists of objective facts. And that is why they say social reality can be known by observation from outside, and social reality is verifiable. Not only observable but verifiable. Like I carry out an observation, if you also carry out an observation, you can test and verify my findings. It will look the same to all because it's independent of the observer. So, if you take up the example of the positivists, we have Auguste Comte, the founder of sociology, and then his follower Émile Durkheim, also a Frenchman. They particularly emphasize on this dimension about social reality having an objective existence. Social reality has an objective existence. It is made up of social facts. Social reality has an objective existence. Durkheim says that when individuals come together in a definite relationship, something more than the individual result, a new kind of reality comes into existence, that is social reality, which is outside the individuals, which has an independent existence, which exists independently of the individual. Say, for example, language or the rules of grammar. I may use wrong grammar, but that does not change the rules of grammar. They exist independently of me. A language exists independent of how a particular speaker uses that language. So it has an autonomous existence. He called the aspects of society as social facts. Social because they pertain to society, and facts because they have an independent existence of their own. Now, he, in his study of suicide, talked about suicide rates. So he collected data on suicide from official records of coroner. So first he proved that it has an independent existence of its own. And therefore it is an objective fact. How? He, on the basis of the data that he collected, he computed annual rates of suicide for different countries, for England, for France, for Germany, for Denmark, like this. That means how many persons per lakh commit suicide per year. All right. Just like you have infant mortality rate, maternal mortality rate, so there is suicide rate also. He computed annual rates of suicide. Then he found that annual rates of suicide tended to remain constant over the years, as long as society remained unchanged. So for each society, like France, so French rate of suicide would be different from German rate of suicide. But in France, from year after year, he collected the data on suicide for 30 years period, 1840 to 1870. And he found that over these years, the rate of suicide, for as long as the society remains the same, remains highly unchanged, constant, nearly constant, not perfectly constant, but almost constant. Now, on the basis of this, he claimed, so these rates of suicide are independent of individual volition. They are being shaped by society. Because if it was dependent on individual, then rates would have been fluctuating. But they are not fluctuating. Year after year, they are constant. So they are being governed by society as a whole. They are objective facts. So, for positivists, sociology is a study of objective facts. Of course, not everyone accepted this argument. I told you already, and I'll repeat that again briefly, that there are non-positivists like phenomenologist Atkinson. He also conducted a study of suicide. So he, using phenomenological argument, said that suicide is not independent of what coroner thinks. Actually, coroner creates suicide. It is not a fact existing by itself independent of the observer. It is dependent on the thinking of the coroner, what he thinks. Because in reality, we do not have conclusive, totally unquestionable evidence that a particular death is suicide. Most cases are the cases where it is on circumstantial evidence we arrive at a conclusion that it is suicide. I gave you example yesterday of Mahbub Roy Chaudhary in Bengal. So police finally thought it is more likely that it could have been suicide. But there was no convincing proof for this. Similarly, another phenomenologist, Cicoural, 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 he conducted a study on crime. The sociologists also talk about, just like they talk about suicide rates, they also talk about crime rates. That so many people committed crime. Now, Cicoural, he became an unpaid police officer in America and joined the police force for his research. He found that it is the policeman to a large extent influences in the definition of crime. Who determines which is the crime, who committed crime and who did not commit crime? Using his common sense meaning. For example, he says that suppose the person who is arrested is a black, then he is more likely to be labeled as a criminal by the policeman than a white. If he is a school dropout, if he is arrogant in his behavior, if he is a slum dweller, now using these common sense meanings, they declare, oh, he is a criminal. Put him in the jail. They don't always have conclusive evidence for the crime that a person committed. And there was a very famous incident where this argument almost was proved true. It happened in long time back in 1989. But I still remember because it was carried in detail in many newspapers and Time magazine, that there was a young couple the wife was in the family way. So they were attending a workshop on child care for young couples, that how to look after the child. Because they don't have a joint family, they don't have family elders. So they conduct formal workshops educating young parents about child care. So they used to go for attending these workshop sessions. One day on the way back, somebody shot the wife dead, and a bullet also grazed past the husband. And the husband said that there were two blacks who wanted to rob us and they have killed my wife. And there was a sense of outrage in America at that time, that how inhuman they could be, a pregnant lady where they killed the infant also, the fetus also, and how inhuman they were. So they said police should act and get hold of them. And in a week's time, police arrested two blacks. They said these are the ones. They matched the description given by the husband. And then they say everyone praised the police for their efficiency, and the matter was settled. 6 months later, once again there was a furor. Somebody committed suicide by jumping from the top floor of a 5-star hotel. That somebody was none other than the husband of that lady who was shot dead. When they searched his room, he had been staying in the 5-star hotel for a long time. So they found a letter where the husband said that I can't live any longer because of the guilt that I am carrying. Actually, he said, I had a fantasy to live in style, to have lots of money. And so he worked out a strategy. He got his wife insured for a lot of money and then shot her dead. And just to pretend that he was also attacked, he fired a gun which just touched his hand, bruised past the hand, did not really, injure him seriously. And then he got the insurance money, moved into a 5-star hotel, lived in style as he has been fantasizing. But after some time, he developed the guilt that he had killed his own wife and his own child. So he committed suicide. Then there was a furor. How on the hell did you get those blacks? Where did you get them? And they said they matched the description also. Actually, no such blacks existed. So, crime can also be created by the law enforcement agencies. At least the decisions are taken on the basis of common sense meanings by the law enforcement agency. So, Sikora said there is no objective truth about official data. They are not objective facts. They are quite subjective. They depend on how the law enforcement agents, how they respond to the situation, how they define the situation, what meanings they give to it, and so on. So there are no objective facts. That's what the non-positivists say. You have understood the point? All right. Then second concept here is values. What are values? Values are the socially accepted standards of desirability. Socially accepted standards of desirability. That means what is desirable and worthwhile in life. What is worthwhile and desirable in life. For example, success. Success is a value. Everyone says, I want to succeed. Whether it's politics or it is business or it is examination or education, everywhere everybody wants to succeed. So success is a value. Yes. When you say this is desirable, failure is undesirable. That is also a value, that I think what is undesirable. Because the moment you say desirable, it means the opposite of that is undesirable. So success is a positive value and failure is a negative value. Now, values are indispensable for social life. No social life is possible without values. Because values give a sense of direction to day-to-day behavior. What is to be done? For example, fitness is a value. All right, that you should be physically fit. So you go to the gym. So what makes you decide what to do after getting up early in the morning? That is your values. They give a sense of direction to your behavior. They define the goals for you. And they also define how these goals have to be achieved. Success. There was one fellow in Hyderabad, in Tamil Nadu or Hyderabad, connected with Hyderabad, who was an IPS officer, and some institute in Hyderabad was transmitting answers to his questions which he was receiving on his smartphone, and was while attempting the exam for civil services. So he was caught and arrested, and I think he has been thrown out of IPS. So he was seeking success only. But he was not following the value of honesty. He was using dishonest means. So what means you have to follow to achieve that goal, they are also shaped by values. So they determine the goals and the path you have to follow to achieve the goal. That is what gives, a sense of order and stability to social life. If there is general agreement among people with regard to values, then it leads to cohesion, unity in society. Otherwise, there will be chaos. It will be a war of all against all. So, social life is impossible without values. Every aspect of social behavior is connected with values. Now, values are also an issue in social research. In fact, social research is guided by the fundamental value, that is the search for truth. Truth is a value. Here, I may also point out that values can be of two kinds: end values and means values. End values and means values. Success is an end value, something that you want for its own sake. Happiness is an end value. Why do you want to be happy? There is no purpose for being happy. Purpose of everything else is to be happy. On the other hand, hard work is a means value. Hard work is a means to achieve success. Now, what is the issue in social sciences or research as far as values are concerned? That many sociologists have pointed out that fact and values must be separated. Fact and values must be kept apart. That science, and therefore also social science, is a search for true knowledge based on facts. Say loudly. I'll repeat it, that science is a search for true knowledge based on facts. So the values should not contaminate the search for facts. Collection of facts and analysis of facts should not be contaminated by values. Now, this frame of mind on the part of the observer, that observer should adopt a frame of mind. So this frame of mind on the part of the observer has been called objectivity. Objectivity. Weber called it value neutrality. See, the observer's values should not distort or contaminate the facts. In day-to-day language, we use a phrase, having a jaundiced eye. Jaundiced eye. You know, jaundice turns the eyes yellow. So they say if somebody has jaundice, he will see the white wall as yellow wall. So, because of the defect in his eye, he will distort the reality. He will not be able to see the white as white, he will see it as yellow. So, the reality is distorted. So, this kind of distortion has to be avoided. That any characteristic of the observer, the frame of mind of the observer, should not distort the reality. That is the goal of science. That is what sciences want to achieve. So, this is what has been called objectivity. Now, I will give you the formal definition of objectivity. You may write down. Objectivity is a frame of mind objectivity is a frame of mind on the part of the observer so that the cultural or personal prejudices or predilections do not contaminate the process of collection and analysis of facts. Cultural or personal prejudices or predilections do not contaminate the process of collection and analysis of facts. Thus, social research should be free from the biases of race, color, religion, class, caste, sex, or ideology. These are illustrations of the type of biases that people can have. So, research should not be contaminated by these biases. For example, the feminists have been attacking sociology for being biased. They say mainstream sociology is actually mainstream sociology. Mainstream sociology is actually mainstream. So, Most sociologists are men. They observe and study also men, and their findings they generalize for women. So there is a patriarchal bias in sociology. There are certain prejudices which are characteristic of patriarchy. So these prejudices enter into the sociological knowledge also. So like this, your research, that means research includes collection and analysis of facts. So the research should be free from all these biases. Biases can be of religion, biases can be of ideology. Now, most of the classical sociologists have greatly emphasized on this need for objectivity. That objectivity for them was a cherished goal. And talking about the same thing, Weber used the term value neutrality, because the values are one of the major source of bias. It is the values of the observer that leads to contamination. It is a major source of bias. So sociology should be free from this value bias. Now, since one of the years, they asked the question that what is the difference between value neutrality and objectivity in the context of Weber's views. So let me clarify the difference, that the two concepts are very closely connected, but objectivity is a broader concept than value neutrality. As I mentioned, that values are an important source of bias. So if we are value neutral, we would be objective, we would be unbiased. But values are though a major source, but are not the only source of bias. There can be other sources of bias also besides values. For example, there can be field limitations. Field limitations. What do you understand by that? That in sociology, when you conduct research, you go to the field to directly observe people. The field means the people, the group, the community which you directly observe. So there can be field limitations. I'll give you an example. There is a sociologist called Andre Bete. He will have a lot to talk about him in the second paper. Here I am only mentioning the field limitation point. he conducted research in a village in Tamil Nadu called Shripuram village. Now, the village was divided into three parts. This was a village which was Brahmin dominated. So, there was one part of the village where Brahmins lived. That was called Agraharam. Agraharam. Then there was the main village which was called the Ur. Tamil word for village is Ur. That is where non-Brahmins lived. Then there was the third part of the village, Keri, where Dalits lived, untouchable, ex-untouchable castes. So this is how the village was, structured. Now, when he went to the village, the Brahmins told him very clearly that we will not allow you to visit the Cheri. Either you live in Cheri or live in Ur or Agraharam. Because of the practice of untouchability. So he was offered quarters by a Brahmin in Agraharam. He said, only on this condition that you will not go to Cheri. So result of it was that he got only one-sided view of the world, village world. He got a picture of the village as Brahmins saw it. It was not the truth. So this is a field limitation. A similar, incident was reported also by M.N. Srinivas when he studied a village called Rampura in Mysore. So he was not allowed to visit the quarters where Dalits and Muslims lived. So he only had the viewpoint of Hindu upper caste. So he did not get to know the true picture. Otherwise, he should have cross-checked everything with the people in Cheri, or in the case of Rampura with people in Dalit quarters and Muslim quarters. He did not get a chance to do that. He only ended up getting one-sided picture. Suppose you want to study a mental asylum, you have to rely on the view of the administration only, because people who are mentally sick, they are not considered capable of providing you right information. So these are the biases that come to your knowledge because of field limitation. So it leads to loss of objectivity. But it is not because of the personal values of the observer. So objectivity is a broader term than value neutrality. Now, so although objectivity is a cherished goal, but it is also an elusive goal. They say that all that one can do is to minimize subjectivity, reduce subjectivity, but objectivity cannot be attained. That we have a famous scholar, Gunnar Myrdal, Gunnar, Gunnar Myrdal, Myrdal. He got a Nobel Prize and he conducted a study on South Asia. That means mainly India. South Asia means India, Bangladesh, Pakistan and Sri Lanka. So, main focus was on India regarding poverty. He called his book Asian Drama, an inquiry into poverty of nations. So, Gunnar Myrdal has commented chaos does not organize itself into cosmos. Chaos does not organize itself into cosmos. We need viewpoints. Now, actually, this point I have already explained to you in my very first lecture, in the lecture on science, that we noted that science is knowledge based on observation. But then I gave you the example, suppose somebody simply goes out on the road and starts observing. The information that he'll give you would be chaotic. Unrelated facts, unrelated data is chaos. It makes no sense, it conveys no meaning. Only when we adopt a certain point of view and arrange that data according to that point of view, then it becomes information. That is the difference between data and information. Data are raw facts. Although information depends, scientific information depends on data, but information is knowledge when data is processed and arranged according to a viewpoint. So, we always have to adopt a viewpoint to look at facts. That is why I said we need a perspective, we need a hypothesis. They are the view, they define our viewpoint. What facts in what relationship are to be observed? Clear? So, every viewpoint carries a value bias. Every viewpoint is based on some value or the other. So, that brings in the value bias. Value neutrality is lost. And without that viewpoint, we cannot collect facts. Because if we do that, it will have no meaning. It will be absurd, chaotic, nonsensical. So, therefore, total objectivity is a myth. All that one can do is reduce subjectivity. Minimize subjectivity. Now, subjectivity can creep in at various levels in the course of research. The prejudice or the bias or the predilection creeps in at various levels. First, the choice of the topic of research. The very choice of the topic of research is influenced by personal background, personal thinking, or ideological orientation, academic training on the part of the observer. Some kind of bias or the other plays an important role in choosing the topic of research. What is to be studied? I will give you example about three great sociologists who are considered the founders of sociology: Karl Marx, Max Weber, and Emil Durkheim. All right. In all the three cases, we find the values playing a very dominant role. That Marx was very passionately concerned about the condition of the poor in Europe, poor workers, the exploitation, the oppression, the misery, and so on. Now, whether good or bad, but this was a bias, value. He wanted their condition to be improved. And therefore, even before he started his investigation of capitalist society, he had declared that capitalism has to be destroyed. He had already reached the conclusion. Somebody says that, have you read in childhood that book Alice in Wonderland? So, he was like the queen in Alice in Wonderland. Queen said, off with their heads first. After that, we will take them to a court of law and try them. So, after you already cut off the head of a person, then you start the trial, litigation, trial, and then pass the judgment in the end. The fellow is already dead. So, the sentence was given first, the trial started later. So, that sentence was based on his inner feeling, that was not based on hard facts. That was based on his strong sense of commitment. Whether good or bad is a different issue. We are not talking about that. But there was his passion which was dominating. In his first published writing, he said, "Workers of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains and a world to win. So destroy capitalism." Then later on he wrote a book called Das Kapital. Das means in German means the capital. So in that he analyzed the character of the capitalist system in detail and so on. That was like the trial. But even before the trial began, he had decided capitalism had to be destroyed and overthrow it. Max Weber, he wrote a very famous study, the study for which he is most famous for, on rise of capitalism. And he highlighted the role of Protestant ethos. In fact, one of the students who came for the demo class, he asked this question in the class, he is not there for the answer today, that why capitalism developed only in Europe? So one of the reasons that Weber pointed out was Protestant religion. Protestant religion is a sect of Christianity. And Protestantism played a very important role, according to Weber, in rise of capitalism. That is why modern capitalism developed only in Europe, nowhere else in the world. And as I told you, modernity is nothing but a legitimization of industrial capitalism. Modernity means characteristics, features or attributes of capitalist industrial society. So modernity therefore developed only in Europe. Now the main point here is about value bias. Why did Weber dwell so much on it? Actually, there was a personal problem that Weber had. His parents were always fighting, father and mother. And one of the issue was on religion. His mother was a very devotedly religious lady, totally committed to Protestant religion. His father was a fun-loving person who took things easy in life. He was concerned about material achievement and, all good things of life, but not so religious. And that's why they fought. And Weber was the eldest son. He grew up in a situation where he saw his parents always opposed to each other. He was unable to decide who is right. Should I be like my father or should I be like my mother? That remained a very major issue for Weber. And they say through this study, he tried to intellectually resolve that conflict, his personal conflict. So it was the very choice of the topic was a result of his personal bias. And when this was the case with those people who were so loudly advocating objectivity, value neutrality, even Durkheim was a strong advocate of objectivity. He said, while observing social facts, treat social facts as things. What is a thing? Thing means an object outside me. All right. Like if you have to study religion, so I should treat religion as a thing, not as a believer. As a believer, I have my personal convictions about God and religion. He says those things must be all abundant. You should observe the reality in a detached way as an outsider. So he was an advocate of objectivity. But at the same time, he was so keen in the study of religion that preoccupied his thinking for a very long time, and in the end, actually, this was his last major work, Totemism, the Elementary Form of Religious Life. That's the title of the book he wrote. So that is his study of religion. Now that was because he came from a family of priests. He was a Jew, and rabbis are Jewish priests. In Judaism or among the Jews, the priests are called rabbi. So his ancestors were rabbis, including his father and grandfather. In fact, he was also supposed to follow the profession of rabbis, which he decided not to, and he instead became a sociologist. Now, but the influence of religion was so much because as a child only he was made to read Old Testament. New Testament is the Bible for Christians, Old Testament is for Jews. So that had an influence. And the Jews have a book of prayers which is called Talmud, Talmud, Talmud. So, and the commentators have said that entire sociology of Durkheim was Talmudic sociology. So much was the influence of religion in his thinking. So even he could not eliminate the prejudice or the bias in the choice of the topic of research. All right. So the very choice of the topic of research is influenced by your personal prejudices. That's a first step in research. In topic of research, you decide what you want to study. Then it is also, it also creeps in the formulation of hypothesis. The formulation of hypothesis also brings in value bias. How? A hypothesis is deduced from a theory, and every theory represents the interest of a particular section of people. Marxist theories, Marxist ideas represent the interests of the working poor. Liberalism, another ideology, that represents the interests of the capitalist, the rich. So every theory represents the interest actually of a particular section of society and has a value bias in it. When you deduce a hypothesis from that theory, you bring that value bias also. Now, then there is also ideological orientation of the researcher because of his or her training. For example, there are two approaches in sociology. We will be discussing them in detail later on, but briefly I may tell you. Functionalism and Marxism. Functionalism believes that society is characterized by general agreement, a consensus. And because of this, there is cohesion and unity in society. Marxism believes that as long as there is inequality, economic inequality, there cannot be true unity in the society. And if at all unity is achieved, it is because of compulsion and coercion by the rich and powerful over poor and weak. All right. These are two ways of looking at things. There are two studies, one in India and one in Mexico. First, I'll give you the Indian example, then I'll mention the Mexican example. Marxism believes that as long as there is economic inequality, there is bound to be conflict in society. If you do find peace and stability in such a society, it is because of coercion and compulsion applied by the rich over the poor. Now, in India, we had caste system. And in the caste system, you had different castes in a relationship of interdependence. You will come across all that in vivid details when you read Mandelbaum. So, there is a landowning caste, and there are occupational castes, peasants, weavers, carpenters, barbers, blacksmith, like that. Now, all these castes work for the landowner, and the landowner at the harvest time pays them in kind. That is how different castes are connected with each other in Indian villages. This was the scenario which lasted up to around 50 or 70 years ago. Now this system has disappeared. Though some relics of this still persist. A person may be working as an electrician, but he may be called a weaver by caste. So the old names do persist, but otherwise this system has gone now. So, but at one time when this system was functioning and intact, this system was called Jajmani relation. You might have heard of that word. Now there are two studies, there are actually very many studies, but I will give you two studies by way of contrast. One study conducted by functionalists. They said this is a very organic system of division of labor where everyone does what they are best suited to do and everyone receives what they most deserve. And that is why we find there is so much of peace and harmony in Indian villages. That's the way functionalists described it. Now, this was also studied by a Marxist, Oscar Lewis. He said this unity is there because the lower caste, occupational caste are poor, they have no land and they are totally dependent for survival on the landlord. So, if they disobey the landlord, then it is only starvation for them. So, out of helplessness, they are obeying the landowners. It is actually a system of politico-economic dominance and dependence. Landowners dominate politically as well as economically. They are head of the panchayat in the village and they control the land, so they are politically and economically dominant, and these occupational castes are helpless and dependent. This is what you say in Urdu, majburi. It is their majburi which makes them obey the landowner, and it gives the impression that there is peace and harmony. So the same thing looked very different to people because their own ideologies were different. They were talking about the same thing, Jajmani system. The functionalists described it in one way, the Marxists described it altogether differently. So what you see depends on how you look at it. Your own ideology shapes your observation. Where is objectivity? There is no objectivity. Similar was the case in Mexico, where Robert Redfield and Oscar Lewis, they studied the village. Robert Redfield was a functionalist. He said peace and harmony prevails in the village. And Oscar Lewis says, no, it is hidden class conflict. There is a built-in conflict between the landowners and the landless people. So, and they studied the village at more or less the same time. So, the same thing looked so different to them because their own ideology was different. So, ideological bias also destroys objectivity. Then, as I already mentioned to you, there are field limitations. There are field limitations. I already gave you the example of Andre Bete, that, or M.N. Srinivas. So, because of all this, then there is another problem. The technique of data collection that we adopt. We adopt various techniques of data collection. For example, interview or participant observation or non-participant observation, like that. Every technique of data collection injects a bias of its own. And there is double subjectivity. The observer introduces subjectivity, the respondent also creates subjectivity. I'll give you examples for both. Like there was a research in America, in that they formed a team of researchers. Half of them were white women and other half were black women. And the group to be studied were black men. When the white women approached those men, wanted to ask questions about how they felt in American society, whether there was discrimination or ill treatment or something against them in the society and so on, they said, no, nothing doing. America is a fantastic place to live. The same group of men, when they were again interviewed on the same with the same questions by black women, they said, we are living like dogs. We are not treated as humans. It's a very terrible place. We can't live here. So, how the respondent defines the situation, on that depends his response. So, what information they received in the two cases was so widely different. Then, another example of interview method, where we will be talking about all these techniques of data collection in detail later on. So, in that, some people who were interviewing were Marxists and others were strong advocates of prohibition. You know, in America at one time prohibition was imposed. It was a miserable failure and they abandoned it. That is when that Al Capone emerged as the godfather, drug peddler. Through bootlegging, he made his millions. Al Capone, crime and business got combined. You have not read about Al Capone. You might have seen that movie Godfather. That is about this kind of thing only. Now, so the people who are Marxists, their respondent said private property is the cause of their poverty. And those who were the supporters of prohibition, their respondent said, because we all drink, so we are poor. So the ideology of the observer influenced the response of the respondent. Because the way you ask questions, the way you approach the topic, that is shaped by your own personal convictions and ideology, and that shapes the response of the respondent. So, for all these reasons, subjectivity creeps in. The total objectivity is an impossibility. Now, here I'll discuss, because one of the years in the exam, as I mentioned, they have asked specifically Weber's view on value neutrality and objectivity. So, I'll mention that also to you. What did Weber have to say in detail? As I mentioned, that Weber did advocate value neutrality. But at the same time, he realized that values cannot be altogether eliminated. Firstly, values of the respondents. Suppose I am studying the students who write civil services exam. I am conducting a study on them. So what are the values which guide their behavior? That would be a part of my inquiry. So value neutrality doesn't mean ignoring all values altogether. The values of the respondents are a part of the subject matter. One. Secondly, even the values of the observer cannot be eliminated. Weber admitted that. So, he made a distinction between area of value relevance and value neutrality. The area of value relevance and value neutrality. That values are unavoidable at various levels. Particularly at the technical level of research, values are indispensable, unavoidable. He admitted that the choice of the topic of research is a value-based choice. I illustrated that just now to you in detail. Then, you have to exercise selectivity when you observe the reality. It's like you have an 18 inches pizza, you can't eat it in one bite. Isn't it? The size of the mouth is so small that you have to go piece by piece. Same way, social reality is unlimited. Human mind is finite. So, we have to decide beforehand which aspect of reality, in what relationship do we have to observe. We have to construct a model of reality selecting one dimension at a time. This is what Weber had called constructing ideal types. This model we create, selective model, is called an ideal type. And why is it called ideal type? Because it exists only at the level of ideas. It is in our ideas it exists. It doesn't exist in reality. Because out of reality, we have selected some limited aspect of it which we want to explain. So, ideal type formation is guided by person's values. Then, we have to interpret the meanings and motives. Suppose I want to study about a person, and Weber emphasized on importance of meanings and motives, like Neo-Kantians, as I told you. So, where do I find his meanings and motives? Suppose that person has written a biography. So, I read the biography, and from that I try to interpret what was the meaning hidden. As I gave you the example that Edwina's letters were studied by journalists to see what was the meaning behind in her mind, in her relationship with Nehru. So, we have to interpret things. Now, this interpretation is based on values. What meaning that I assign, it will be my value system which will shape my interpretation. And at all these levels, values are unavoidable. This is what he called the area of value relevance. But at the same time, he said we should be value free. We should be value neutral. That the empirical data must be collected in a detached manner empirical data must be collected in a detached manner. And we should use clearly defined concepts to carry out observation. The sociologist should not make evaluative judgment on the empirical evidence. He said it but never followed it in his own writings. He condemned capitalist society, he condemned bureaucracy and so on. While in his rules of method, he said we should not pass a judgment. A priest and a prostitute are equally sacred for the observer. He should not condemn one or appreciate the other. So, no value judgments. Then, sociologists should be indifferent to moral implications of research. Sociologists should be indifferent to moral implications of research. Did you understand the meaning? See, suppose I am conducting research. In that I come across certain information. If I make that information open, I may feel that it will adversely affect public morality. It will be unhealthy for the society. And therefore, I try to suppress that information. That should not be done. Job of a sociologist is to report the truth, whatever consequences it may have on reality. He should not think in terms of how it is going to impact public morality. Did you understand that point? Yes. Then, sociologists should not try to propagate his own values. Sociologist should not try to propagate his own values. I'll give you an example of how people are using research to propagate values. This is what is happening these days in India. See, you have Hindutva ideology. And in Hindutva it is said that who are the Hindus? Those whose Pitrabhu, that means fatherland, and Punyabhu, sacred land, is in India. So they said Muslims and Christians are non-Hindus because their sacred land is outside India. Somebody said even Aryans are from outside only. They came from Europe. And they are the ones who created all scriptures of Hinduism. So, supporters of Hindutva are trying to somehow prove that Aryans originated in India only. And it is from India they went everywhere, rather than coming from outside and settling in India. Now, is it not distorting facts to justify your own ideology? This is unscientific. So, that is not what should be done. That research should not be used to propagate your own values and your own ideology. And finally, they say that the researcher should be value frank. Researcher should be value frank. What is value frank? That if you have, since it is now settled that total objectivity is unavoidable, is impossible, and values are unavoidable. So the next best thing you can do is be open about it. Say at the end of research that these were my values and these were my assumptions and this is how I was approaching the subject matter. So that those who read your research finding, they will know that it is from a certain point of view. It is not the absolute truth. This is called being value frank. So this is Weber's concept of value neutrality. I have specially mentioned it because in one of the years in the exam, as you will see, please do have a look at questions. Tomorrow we are going to discuss the questions on science, scientific method, positivism and objectivity. So one of the questions was, they specifically asked Weber's views. Then another aspect of objectivity, which I have already discussed also with you the other day while talking about positivism, that attack on objectivity. So far, we have been talking about those people who consider objectivity desirable. There are critiques, they say too much of objectivity is not even desirable. You should not be too detached. Now, advocates of this viewpoint are Alvin Goldner. I discussed Alvin Goldner's view the other day. Critical theorists, feminists, feminists point out that what we have is a patriarchal society. If you are detached, you are only supporting the status quo. You are indirectly supporting patriarchy. So, you are not reporting the truth. Then, Alvin Goldner, as I mentioned the other day, he said that cold objectivity makes the sociologist self-alienated. He cannot be his true self. So one should not be amoral and apolitical. Amoral means having no moral stance. Apolitical means having no political viewpoint. So you should not be amoral or apolitical. If such is the case, then sociology becomes only a spectator. Somebody watching the tamasha, that's all. As I gave you the example the other day of Vietnam War, that sociologists described the war, studied war, but did not condemn it. Did not adopt a moral stand or a political stand. Did not criticize American foreign policy. So, then sociologists can play no creative role. That knowledge is not for knowledge's sake. Knowledge is for social welfare. In fact, sociologist himself is being supported by society. So, sociologist has a commitment to society. They say, now listen to this carefully, that you may avoid particular values in the name of value neutrality, but there are certain universal values like respect for human life. No matter which culture, whatever, but human life is sacred, must be preserved. That's a universal value. Whoever destroys human life must be condemned. Similarly, human freedom. It's a universal value. So like this, there are certain universal values. Sociologists must adhere to those values. He should not be indifferent to those values in the name of value neutrality and objectivity. Otherwise, sociology will not be able to play its role of social reform. It will not be able to contribute to a better society. Then, even postmodernists dismiss the idea of objectivity. They say every observation is from a point of view, and therefore every point of view is as good as another point of view. So there is no such thing as objectivity, and one should not care for objectivity. This is an extreme viewpoint. So this is about fact, value, and objectivity. All right. So now we'll end with this. Tomorrow I am going to discuss the questions on this. I request you, please do go through the questions. If you have this booklet, the questions are under the heading Sociology as a Science. Now, there would still be some questions which you would not be able to handle, because that some part I have not done, no, I told you in the beginning. So, exclude that, but rest of the questions you please carefully go through, try to answer, try to see whether you have the content to answer them, and if there is anything which is totally not understood by you, that becomes your doubt. Tomorrow I will briefly talk about the answer of these questions before you. Thank you.